Hi guys, I'm Arturo Engel from Arturo and Lauren. We're architecture and filmmaking photographers in Los Angeles in the United States. And we're running the Shifter community, Shifter.com on Instagram. And we have this community when other photographers and filmmakers that do architecture and interiors gather together. We share our experiences, we share our behind the scenes process. And I just realized that we don't have anything on YouTube, and it's a good, I don't know, I just thought about this 10 minutes ago, and I think it's a good excuse to share our thoughts about industry news and different topics. Also, so many of you guys ask me directly in the Arturo and Lauren account or in the Shifter.com account, what do I think about different camera releases. So I think this is going to be a good format to do this. Today we're going to talk about the new Nikon Z8 camera. The Nikon Z8 is a flagship Nikon mirrorless full frame camera that sits just below the Nikon Z9. The Nikon Z9 was introduced 2 years ago. It's more, the shape of the camera is more like it's a taller camera. Is a rocked camera made for sports photography, but it can be used for anything because it has all the capabilities and the features that any photographer can need. But I'm glad that they introduced the Nikon Z8 because it's the same thing, pretty much the same thing, but it's just shorter, you know. It's easier to fit on different supports, is lighter to handheld, you know, and it's cheaper. I think it's a win-win. So I want to talk about the industry as a whole and where it sits in the Nikon lineup, but also want to talk about if it makes sense to buy for architecture and interior photographers or not. That's the thing that we talk about in the Shifter community. So let me check if the audio transmitter is recording. Imagine that I'm talking for a while and it doesn't do anything. You guys cannot hear me. So the Nikon Z8, okay, Nikon was the first camera company to put video capabilities into a photo camera. It was the Nikon D90. I think it was an accident. They just put it like an option, but it was a revolution. It wasn't because of the Nikon D90. It was more the next one that was released by Canon, the 5D Mark II, in 2008 or 9. And people got crazy with this camera because it was the first time that you can have a big sensor, you know, and with the implications of filming with a big sensor, you know, shallower depth of field, you know, and in a small camera and small and affordable camera body. So the 5D Mark II, one of the first cameras to record video after the Nikon D90, was a hit because of the video capability. I don't even know if Nikon expected that, but it wasn't possible before that because with CCD sensors didn't have live view. It was not possible to do video, but with the introduction of CMOS sensors, that's where it became reality. So that said, Nikon was a bit late to the full-frame digital DSLR market. Canon, I think it was the first 5D camera or 1D, I cannot remember, was earlier in the party. And Nikon, it wasn't until the Nikon D3 or something, years before. And that's where Canon got a big chunk of market. Photographers that were coming from 35mm film, they knew what it was shooting at 35mm or medium format, and they were a bit disappointed because Nikon had good digital cameras, the Nikon D100 and other cameras, but they didn't have a full frame 35mm camera. So Canon got got users from Nikon and other brands to their digital cameras because they were so good by the time. Then another photography revolution happened when with mirrorless cameras, where they removed the mirror of the cameras and it allowed to have a digital viewfinder that is good for certain applications, that for video recording, for example, and to come up with different lens designs, more compact lens designs. I have stabilization in the body and so on. You guys know that. But the first brand to popularize the first brand to release a full-frame mirrorless camera was Sony. I think it was back in 2013 or 14 or 12, something like that. And it wasn't until 2017 or something that other brands like Canon released their first EOS R full-frame mirrorless cameras. But again, Nikon was late in the party again. They introduced the Nikon Z7 and the Z6 way after other brands, and I think it was another missed opportunity by Nikon. And also, despite that they released the first Nikon D90 camera with video capabilities, they were not leading the industry. Canon, Sony, and other brands have historically been better at video. And you know, Nikon was one of the top cameras in the film industry and at the very beginning of the digital era, but they did a few mistakes, in my opinion, that made that other brands like Sony got a big stake in a big share in the market. So Canon is still number one. I think Sony and Nikon is number two, but they're catching up now. And their release, I think, is one of the most important releases in the recent years, is the Nikon Z8. Finally, they have something that they can brag, that can shoot proper photo and video with no compromises. My assistant from Spain, now I'm in the US with Lauren, but when I was working in Spain, I had a really established photography and videography, architecture, photography and videography business there. I've been shooting for a while. And my assistant, Carlos, is a Nikon user. He was using the Nikon D800, the other Nikons in the past. And when he wanted to switch to mirrorless because he wanted a lighter camera, you know, he wanted to experience the mirrorless experience, and he bought the Z7. Before switching to mirrorless, he was debating if it would make sense for him or not, because he could well have gone to Sony, for example, and he could have adapted the lenses to Sony, the Nikon lenses, and it would be okay. But he wanted to be loyal to Nikon, and he bought the Z7. It was a bit, I played with this camera because Carlos got this camera, and I've heard his concerns, have his comments about the camera, and about the Nikon Z7, and it didn't have the image quality, especially in the shadows, the best shadow. I don't know if you guys remember, but the Nikon D800 was it was a really good camera for the time. I think it was released in 2000, I don't know, remember, 2012 or something like that, or 2011, I don't know. But it was the sensor of the Nikon D800, it was the best for the time, and it was the highest resolution camera for the moment. For the time, it had 36 megapixels. It was the first camera that when you lift out the shadows, it had so much information, so much dynamic range. Nowadays it's more normal, but for the time, for 10 years ago, it was not normal. I remember Carlos had the Nikon D800, and other people had the Nikon D850. The D850, one of the best DSLRs ever made. And He was a bit disappointed because the Nikon Z7 didn't have as much photo image quality as the Nikon D800 or D850. They didn't tune the camera as much. The video stopped. The car was full. I was saying the Nikon Carlos realized that when he bought the Nikon Z7, the images that he produced, they weren't as good as previous cameras. So it had a weird micro contrast management, you know. I don't know, the image was a bit weird. Also the shadows were not as clean. The skies were a bit, the blue of the skies were a bit flat. But again, with photo, you can work around it. You can massage the files in RAW, and you know, you can get it where you want it with a bit of effort. But in video, it's not the same. When I sold my business to Carlos, Carlos was my assistant in Spain. Now we moved to the US. I'm with Lauren now. And I sold my business to Carlos. His clients, his clients are asking him for video, and he had the Nikon Z7, and he wasn't that happy with the results because the video quality of the Nikon Z7 is not good. It doesn't have internal logarithmic profile. The video is too sharp. The colors are not that good. And for photo it's fine, but for video he wasn't that happy. He wanted to change to Sony before even switching to Nikon Z7, but he was on the fence. He wanted to keep loyal to the brand, and he had big hopes that they were going to release something big, and he was waiting for 2 or 3 years and nothing happened. And he recently switched to Sony. He bought the Sony A7 IV, and he's so happy with it, and for video it's so good and everything. But now that Carlos just switched to finally switched to Sony. Nikon released the Z8. The Nikon Z8 it's a really important camera for Nikon because it's the first one that they can say that is the first Nikon camera that does really good photo and video. It's not easy to find a good camera in the industry that can do really good photo quality for commercial photography and for corporate videos, you know, at the same level. The Nikon Z8 is one of them. They released the Nikon Z9 in a few years ago, but it's a bulkier camera. It's a camera more dedicated for sports because of the shape of the body. You can use it for so many things, but it's better for these things. And they have packed all the features and the same sensor and the same photo and video quality in a smaller body. So I think we have a win here. I think it makes so much sense for different people. For example, for those that are using Nikon DSLRs, I think it's a good upgrade because you have the in-body stabilizations for photographers. I know that we, as architect photographers, most of the time we shoot in a very static way with a tripod, and we don't have to rely on. The camera doesn't shake like it does when we handheld the camera. But sometimes, you know, you grab the camera in hand, you want to take a few details and whatnot, and you want to capture some action with people and whatnot on an interior architecture shot. And if you have in-body image stabilization, is better. You can get half a second exposure shots no motion blur, and that is something that is so hard to do with a DSLR. You know, you can get something with a stabilized lens, but not all the lenses are stabilized, and tilt-shift lenses are not stabilized. So I think for Nikon DSLR shooters that shoot for high-end clients and, you know, want to invest in a good camera, the Nikon Z8 is going to be a good evolution for them. You're going to have the same photo image quality as you have with your DSLR, but you're going to have a better experience. Some people don't adapt to optical view to digital viewfinders. I personally like it more because what you see is what you're gonna get. But maybe for low light situations and other specific situations, an optical viewfinder is better. But for me personally, it's better, and the live view technology is better these days. So I'm not so concerned about that. So I think it's a good upgrade for legacy DSLR Nikon shooters. Of course, it's a huge upgrade for people that shoot video. You know, shooting with a mirrorless camera is much better. You have the EVF again, you have the in-body stabilization, you have better image quality. Now with the Z8, finally, we have N-lock internally. With the Z7 and the previous Z7 and Z6, either the Mark II or the Mark I, the limitation was that you cannot record log video internally. It had to be with an external recorder. The same thing for 10-bit. It couldn't record 10-bit internally, so it was so limited. It wasn't as good as, you know, a Sony or even a Canon mirrorless camera. So it's a huge upgrade for those who want to record video. It also has, aside from log profile, it also has ProRes. Any computer can edit ProRes. Because it's a uncompressed codec, it's easier to play with than H.265. But more importantly, it shoots internal RAW video. Other camera brands, they just offer RAW video to be recorded externally. Nikon is one of the first brands, alongside with the Canon R5 or R5C, that allows raw video recording internally in the photo cameras. It has ProRes RAW and NRAW. I personally prefer more NRAW because the files are smaller and it can record better, because ProRes RAW is a really big, the files are really big, the processing is so big, and they don't, the images are softer because they don't do a full pixel readout. I don't want to get so technical, but if you guys want the best of the best raw video quality of Nikon, of the Nikon Z9 on Z8, you're gonna have to film in NRAW, and you're gonna get all the advantage of it in programs like DaVinci Resolve, when you're gonna be able to play with the exposure slider, the temperature and hue slider, if it was a photo stills raw file, and that's huge. That's huge, and the file sizes are not that huge, so it's a win-win. I like that it shoots really good video up to 4K 60 or 8K, even 8K 60. That's great. I don't know who needs 8K, but you know, a good 4K 60 or good 4K 25 when we don't need to slow down the clips is more than enough. But yeah, it's a great camera. Also, it's a great camera for DSLR shooters, for people that film video, but also for people that has the C7 or C6, and they have these weird color signs, the weird noise. You know, the shadows are not as clean. I think it's a huge upgrade, and it's way more affordable than the Nikon Z9 and smaller, and I think it makes so much sense. For people that are in other brands, I personally don't think it makes as much sense. I wouldn't switch for example, from Sony to Nikon because it's just the raw video. Raw in video is not as important as photo, because what is more important in video is a good logarithmic profile and 10-bit. That's the minimum to have really good image quality. Raw video, what is gonna allow you is to correct video files in post-production where the white balance or the exposure is a bit off. But other than that, it's not going to offer you more dynamic range or anything. It's going to offer you more latitude. Well, more latitude, it means if you underexpose a video or overexpose, you're going to have the latitude to pull it down or push it. Depends on the situation. But if you expose and white balance your video files correctly, and the camera has a really good log profile, 10-bit log profile, you're not going to get any advantage. So if you guys are shoot with Sony or Panasonic or Fuji, other brands that don't have internal raw recording, I think it doesn't make sense for you guys to switch. Yeah, I like that. Again, I like that they implemented it internally, because it's a pain in the ass to have the other branches just allow raw recording externally. With the Atomos recording, it's a pain in the ass to have the cable and everything. It's heavier, more easier. The cable is easier to break. You don't always especially for sliders and gimbal, you don't always want to have the big setup. So I think it's a win-win that they didn't internally. But if you're in Panasonic, in the L-mount series cameras, or you have a Sony, I wouldn't change. I like that. Yeah, what I don't like is things that they could improve. Okay, let's talk about things that they could improve. The nature of, again, it's a great hybrid camera. What does it mean? It does really good high resolution photos or really good high resolution videos with a decent quality in both. But other cameras with lower megapixel count, like the Sony A7S III, the Sony FX3, they have a 12 megapixel sensor, and it doesn't require as much processing power to shoot, for example, 4K 120. The Nikon Z8 and Z9 also shoot 4K 120, but the image is much softer because it doesn't do a proper readout of the sensor. The Sony A7S III or the FX3, because it has lower pixels, it just takes all the pixels directly from the sensor, and it readouts at 120 frames per second directly, in a clean way. And the image of 4K 120 and 4K 60 or 4K 24 is the same across the different frame rates. That's a thing that you don't have with the high resolution cameras like the Nikon Z8, Canon R5. They sacrifice a bit of image quality when shooting 120. 4K 60, fine. 8K 60, fine. But sometimes we need a bit more frame rates, especially again, the normal frame rate for architecture and interior films is 24 or 25 in Europe, and in Australia is the normal. But when you wanna, when you're filming on gimbal, or you're when you're panning with the fluid head, sometimes you wanna make sure that you're gonna have extra flexibility in post-production to slow the clips a bit, and you are forced to shoot in 60 or even in 120 frames per second, especially in gimbals, to mimic like a crane shot, like a jeep shot, and it's not easy to do it so slow, right? And so if you have the light, if you have enough light, you can shoot at 120 frames per second, and you can slow it down so much. With the Nikon Z8, you have the ability to shoot that frame rate, but the image is going to be softer compared to Sony A7 III. But it's a trade-off that you have from having a high quality sensor, resolution sensor. But you know, I think they pack so much already in the camera, so it's just minor details. Also, I would like to have seen a open gate video option. There are cameras as the Panasonic S1H, the Panasonic S5 II, the Fuji X-H2S. They allow filming in open gate video. In what does it mean? Open gate video, I think it started with ARRI, is the ability to record the full sensor as a. When you're shooting video in any mirrorless or DSLR camera, you're shooting a cropped, the height, you're not capturing the whole height of the sensor. You're recording a 16:9 area of the sensor, right? You're recording the whole width, but not the height. So in some cameras, like the one that we just mentioned, you can capture the whole height of the sensor, and you would say, oh, why would you like the whole height if your project has to end up being 16:9 is the normal delivery aspect ratio for clients, and it's true. But for me personally, I like to have the flexibility to have a bit more high and to be able to align, especially when shooting interiors or an architecture, and there are always lines to be corrected in post-production, even if using tilt-shift lenses. Sometimes the lines are a bit off. And I like the ability of, you know, have a bit of more room to play around. And I love when cameras have the open gate mode. I have the Fuji X-H2S myself, and I almost always film in open gate mode. Also, open gate is useful for those people that film in anamorphic, because you crop less. When you de-squeeze, you have a more usable image, final image. But you know, I never used anamorphic for architecture, because you lose the height when you squeeze the image, and it's not a thing. We can talk about it in another day. So miss your opportunities in Nikon Z8, the open gate video, the sensor has so many megapixels, and I don't think it's the best thing for video. On the photo side, I think they nail it. I wouldn't change anything. 45 megapixels is more than enough for anything. And I like mirrorless cameras. Even that it's a Nikon camera, you can use Nikon F-mount lenses. You can use your tilt-shift lenses from Nikon. You can even use Canon tilt-shift lenses, everything. You can use, you know, and I like the short flange distance of Nikon. It has 16 millimeter short flange distance. You can adapt pretty much anything. There are adapters that you can even use Sony lenses, Sony E-mount lenses with autofocus and everything. You can use a Sony G Master lens or a telephoto lens. You can use everything. So the Nikon Z mount is one of the best mounts in my opinion. It has a big diameter for the IBs to play around for the stabilization, and a short flange distance. You can adapt anything. It's a great mount. I like the EVF on the Z8. I like the grip. I like the screen. It's a bit it's a bit heavier and bigger than the C7 and C8, but you know, it has to process 8K raw video, so I guess that it needs room for the heat management. So I don't know, I think it's a great camera. If you're doing just video, it's not the best camera, but if you're like me, that you're doing different things, photo and video, and you want to have the flexibility to have one camera that can do it all, I think it's a great camera. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments. Let me know if you guys like this type of content. It's the first of a kind. Hopefully we're going to bring more people into the channel, and we're going to talk about different topics in the industry. Remember to like and subscribe to the video. It helps us. And also go to Shifter.com, the Shifter community on Instagram, or our personal account, Arturo and Lauren. Then you can see more what we do. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. What are you doing, my paste?